By sunrise, she was supposed to become a wife, but before the church bells could finish ringing, a white police officer had her standing beside her own car, like she had stolen somebody else's dream. The white Bentley sat at the curb outside St. Matthew's Chapel in Savannah, Georgia, its polished hood catching the soft gold light of a Saturday morning that should have belonged to flowers, family, and vows. Naomi Brooks stood beside it in a wedding dress that moved gently in the warm breeze, one hand still wrapped around a bouquet of ivory roses, the other held close to her chest as red and blue lights flashed across the lace at her sleeves. Less than 300 yards away, the chapel doors were open. Guests were already seated beneath stained glass windows. A violinist was warming up near the altar. Her groom, Marcus, was standing in a charcoal suit, checking his watch for the third time, smiling at first because brides were allowed to be late, then slowly losing that smile when the whispers started moving through the pews. Outside, Officer Ryan Whitaker stepped from his cruiser with the kind of confidence that came from years of never being questioned. Tall, broad-shouldered, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, he looked at Naomi, then at the Bentley, then back at Naomi as if the math offended him. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," he said. Naomi blinked once, calm but confused. "Officer, this is my car." Ryan gave a short laugh, not loud, not friendly, just enough to make the two tourists on the sidewalk turn their heads. "That's what they all say." The words landed colder than the morning air. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the bouquet, but her voice stayed even. "My registration is in the glove compartment. My license is in my clutch. My name is on everything." "Of course it is," Ryan said, walking closer, his boots tapping against the brick street. "And I'm supposed to believe a woman in a wedding dress just happens to be driving a car worth more than most houses around here." A few people slowed near the chapel steps. Someone lifted a phone, not aggressively, just instinctively, the way people do when they sense something wrong but are too afraid to step into it. Naomi saw the camera. She saw the guests peeking through the church doors. She saw her mother's face appear in the distance, confused, then frightened. And still, Naomi did not raise her voice. That was the first thing that unsettled Ryan. Most people begged. Some cried. Some got angry. Naomi simply stood there with her chin lifted, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the small black camera clipped to his uniform. "Make sure that stays on," she said softly. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Excuse me. Your body camera," Naomi said. "Make sure it stays on." For 1 second, the street seemed to pause. Even the church bells faded behind the hum of traffic and the quiet gasp of strangers. Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the uniform gave him ownership of the air between them. "Listen carefully. I got a call about a stolen luxury vehicle matching this description, and you match what I'm looking for." Naomi looked down at her white dress, then back at him. A bride. His mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Someone who doesn't belong behind the wheel of that car. There it was. Not hidden, not dressed up in procedure, just sitting in the open like a stain. Naomi felt it, the old familiar weight pressing against her ribs, the kind of judgment that arrives before facts, before names, before truth. But she had spent her entire life learning how not to bend under that weight. She had stood in courtrooms where men twice her age tried to talk over her. She had read files that proved how easily power could become cruelty when no one held it accountable. And this morning, of all mornings, she knew something Officer Ryan Whitaker did not. By 8 o'clock, a sealed administrative order had taken effect inside the county courthouse. By 9, the nameplate on the bench had been changed. By 10, every bailiff, clerk, and attorney in that building would know that Judge Harold Whitaker, Ryan's powerful father-in-law, was no longer presiding. Naomi Brooks was. But Ryan did not know that yet. He only saw a black woman in a wedding dress beside a car he had decided she could not own. He reached out his hand. "Keys." "Now." Naomi slowly placed them in his palm, not because he had won, but because truth does not need to panic. Somewhere behind her, her mother called her name. Somewhere ahead, her groom started walking out of the chapel. And as Ryan turned the keys over with a smug little shake of his head, Naomi looked once more into his body camera and said, "Officer, you're going to want to remember every word you say next." Marcus made it halfway down the chapel steps before one of the ushers caught his arm and whispered his name with the kind of fear people use when they do not want to cause a scene, but already know the scene has begun. He looked past the white columns, past the flower arch, past the guests gathering at the doorway, and saw Naomi beside the Bentley with police lights washing over her dress in red and blue. For a moment, he did not move. His mind refused to accept the picture in front of him. This was the woman who had spent 3 months choosing the exact shade of roses for the ceremony. The woman who had stayed up past midnight writing personal vows on thick ivory paper. The woman who had walked through every storm in her life with a calm that made other people stronger just by standing near her. She was not supposed to be standing on the curb explaining her existence to a man who had already decided not to hear her. "Naomi," Marcus called, his voice carrying across the street. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see that she was all right, but not enough to invite panic. That was Naomi. Even when the world leaned toward chaos, she gave the people she loved a reason to breathe. Officer Ryan Whitaker turned toward Marcus with irritation crossing his face. "Sir, stay back. This is police business." Marcus stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, hands visible, posture careful. He was a civil rights attorney. He knew how quickly the wrong movement could be rewritten by the wrong person. "That is my fiancée," he said. "And that is her car." Ryan let out a small breath through his nose, almost amused. "Convenient." Naomi's mother, Denise, reached the curb next, one hand pressed to her chest, her Sunday pearls trembling against her collarbone. "Officer, please, there has been some mistake. My daughter is getting married in less than 20 minutes. Ryan did not look at her for more than a second. Then she should have thought about that before driving a vehicle reported stolen. Naomi's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. This was how it always began, with a statement dressed like a fact, with certainty placed where evidence should have been. "Who reported it stolen?" she asked. Ryan glanced down at his radio, then back at her. "That is not your concern right now. It is my concern if I am the registered owner. You are not in charge here." The words came fast, sharper than before, and the small crowd felt the shift. A bridesmaid standing near the chapel doors covered her mouth. An older man in a navy suit shook his head, but said nothing. Across the street, a woman outside a coffee shop kept recording, her phone held steady with both hands. Naomi noticed all of it. The silence, the fear, the familiar calculation people made when injustice unfolded in public. Should I speak? Should I stay safe? Should I pretend I did not see? Ryan opened the driver's side door and leaned inside, searching with unnecessary confidence. He found the registration exactly where Naomi said it would be. For a brief moment, the paper sat in his hand like a warning. Naomi Brooks. Same name on the insurance card. Same address. Same vehicle identification number. His eyes moved over the documents, but his expression did not soften. Instead, he looked annoyed, as if the truth had inconvenienced him. "This could be forged," he said. Marcus took one step forward before stopping himself. "You cannot be serious." Ryan pointed a finger in his direction. "Back up." Naomi lifted her hand slightly, a small signal to Marcus. "Do not give him what he wants." The message passed between them without words. Marcus swallowed the fury rising in his throat and stepped back. That restraint only made Ryan more comfortable. Power loves a quiet room. It mistakes patience for permission. He walked back to Naomi with the registration still in his hand and lowered his voice just enough to sound personal. "Let me guess. Big wedding, expensive car, nice little story. People like you always come prepared." Denise flinched. Marcus's face went still. Naomi did not. She held Ryan's gaze and spoke with the same controlled calm she had used in courtrooms full of hostile attorneys. "Officer Whitaker, you have my license, my registration, and my insurance. You have no legal reason to detain me." Ryan froze at the sound of his name. "How do you know my name?" Naomi looked at the badge on his chest. "You are wearing it." A few people in the crowd murmured softly, and that embarrassed him more than any accusation could have. His pride tightened around him like armor. "Turn around," he said. Denise gasped. Marcus stepped forward again. For what reason? Ryan's eyes never left Naomi. Suspicion of vehicle theft and failure to comply. Naomi exhaled slowly. The bells inside the chapel began to ring again, bright and beautiful and painfully out of place. She turned without protest, placing her bouquet gently on the hood of the Bentley before he could touch it. The flowers looked impossibly delicate against the polished white paint. Ryan guided her hands behind her with procedural stiffness, careful enough not to look extreme, cold enough to humiliate. When the cuffs clicked, the sound moved through the crowd like a crack in glass. Naomi closed her eyes for 1 second. Not from fear, not from defeat, from memory. She thought of every person who had stood before a bench trying to prove they were human to someone determined to see them as a case number. Then she opened her eyes and looked toward Marcus. "Call the courthouse," she said. Ryan laughed under his breath. "The courthouse is exactly where we are going." Naomi nodded once, almost sadly. "I know." The ride to the county courthouse lasted less than 6 minutes. But to everyone watching from the chapel steps, it felt like the morning had split in two. One part of the day still belonged to the wedding, to roses tied with satin ribbon, to programs printed with Naomi and Marcus in elegant gold lettering, to the soft music waiting inside the sanctuary. The other part belonged to flashing lights, a cruiser pulling away from the curb, and a bride in the back seat sitting upright with her wrists restrained and her veil folded over one shoulder like a wounded flag. Naomi stared through the side window as Savannah moved past her in bright, ordinary pieces. A mail carrier crossing the street. A father lifting a toddler onto his hip. A woman watering ferns outside a brick townhouse. Life continued as if nothing sacred had been interrupted. Officer Ryan Whitaker drove with one hand on the wheel, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror, searching for panic, searching for tears, searching for anything that would make him feel larger than the mistake he was refusing to admit. Naomi gave him none of it. She sat still, her breathing even, her wedding dress gathered carefully so it would not drag against the floorboard. That small act of dignity irritated him more than anger would have. "You are awfully calm for someone being taken in," Ryan said. Naomi kept her eyes on the passing streets. "I have been in courtrooms most of my adult life." He smirked. "As what, a witness?" "Sometimes." "Defendant." She turned her head then, slowly, and looked at him through the mirror. "Never." The answer was quiet, but it landed with enough weight to make him look away first. His radio crackled softly. Dispatch repeated a code, then mentioned confusion around the stolen vehicle report. Ryan reached for the volume and turned it lower. Naomi noticed. Of course she noticed. People trained to hide information always forget that silence has a shape. "You may want to ask dispatch who made the report," she said. "You may want to stop telling me how to do my job. I am telling you there is still time to correct this." He laughed once. "Correct this? Lady, you really think a fancy dress and a clean vocabulary make you untouchable?" Naomi looked down at the faint red marks forming near her wrists and let his words pass through the quiet place inside her where rage had learned discipline. She thought of her grandmother, who used to say dignity was not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain choose your name. Naomi had carried that sentence through law school, through clerkships, through hearings where men called her emotional when she was precise and aggressive when she was prepared. She had carried it that morning when she signed the final oath documents before sunrise, before the makeup artist arrived, before her bridesmaids filled the hotel suite with laughter and hairspray and nervous joy. No one at the chapel knew she had already taken the oath. No one except Marcus, her mother, and the county administrator who had whispered, "Congratulations, Judge Brooks," as if the words themselves needed protection. The appointment had not been public for ceremony yet. It was supposed to be announced Monday. Judge Harold Whitaker's early retirement had been described politely in official language, but Naomi had read the sealed files. She knew why the bench had changed hands. She knew about the dismissed complaints, the missing records, the officers who received favor after favor while ordinary people were treated like burdens. And now his son-in-law was driving her straight into the building where that history was waiting. Ryan pulled up beside the courthouse entrance with a satisfied breath, as if the stone columns belonged to his family. "Welcome to where stories end," he said, stepping out. Naomi looked through the window at the courthouse doors, where two clerks had already turned at the sight of the cruiser. One of them, an older woman named Evelyn Carter, froze with a stack of folders in her arms. Her eyes widened when she saw Naomi in the back seat. Not because she saw a suspect, because she saw the new judge. Ryan opened the door and gestured for Naomi to step out. "Careful with the dress," she said. He frowned. "What?" Naomi lifted her chin toward the courthouse. "A courtroom remembers how people enter it." Ryan shook his head, missing the warning completely. "You really do love hearing yourself talk." As he guided her toward the entrance, Evelyn Carter hurried inside ahead of them, her heels clicking across the marble floor like a countdown. In the distance, a bailiff looked up from the security desk, then straightened. Another clerk whispered something to a deputy. The air changed before Ryan understood why. Naomi felt it immediately. Recognition. Alarm. Truth moving faster than arrogance. And as the courthouse doors opened, Ryan walked in smiling, still believing he had brought a thief to justice, never realizing he had just escorted the justice in. Inside the courthouse, the sound changed. Outside, the world had been bright and open, filled with church bells, traffic, and the nervous murmurs of people who did not know what to do with what they had seen. Inside, everything became colder. The marble floor reflected the fluorescent lights in pale strips. The air smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and polished wood. Every footstep carried too far. Every whisper seemed to know where it was going. Officer Ryan Whitaker walked beside Naomi Brooks with his shoulders squared, guiding her through the front security area as if the building itself had already agreed with him. Naomi moved carefully, the hem of her wedding dress brushing the floor, her veil catching briefly against the corner of the metal detector before she turned and freed it with quiet grace. The bailiff at the desk, Thomas Reed, looked up and went still. His eyes moved from the cuffs to Naomi's face, then to Ryan's badge, then back to Naomi again. He opened his mouth, but Naomi gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Thomas understood. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That silence was not weakness. It was a match waiting for the right air. Ryan noticed the exchange and frowned. Problem? He asked. Thomas looked at him for a long second. No problem, officer. But the way he said officer carried something Ryan missed completely. Respect had left the word. Procedure was all that remained. They passed through the lobby, and the courthouse seemed to wake up around them. A clerk stepped out of records holding a folder and forgot why she had come. A public defender near the elevators lowered her phone slowly. Two deputies standing near the information desk exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that says the story you are watching is already bigger than the person causing it. Naomi saw them all, but she kept her face calm. Her wrists ached slightly, and a faint streak of dust marked the lower edge of her dress, but her posture never changed. Imagine standing there in the clothes meant for the happiest promise of your life, while strangers stare at the evidence of somebody else's assumption wrapped around your hands. Imagine hearing your own heels touch the courthouse floor and knowing that in a few minutes, the same room built to question you would have to answer to you. Ryan leaned closer as they approached the elevators. You are enjoying this little audience, are you? Naomi did not look at him. No one enjoys being humiliated. Then stop acting superior. She turned her head just enough for him to see her eyes. I am acting patient. The elevator doors opened before he could respond. They stepped inside with Thomas Reed and Evelyn Carter, the senior clerk who had rushed ahead from the entrance. Evelyn held a folder tight against her chest. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. She looked at Naomi with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to reveal a secret that was no longer safe. Good morning, Miss Brooks, Evelyn said, choosing her words carefully. Ryan laughed. Miss Brooks is having a difficult morning. Evelyn's gaze flicked to him. So I see. The elevator rose slowly. Second floor. Third floor. Fourth. The silence pressed in so hard that even Ryan seemed uncomfortable. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and dialed. When the call connected, his voice changed, warmer and smugger at the same time. Hey, tell your dad I am bringing one in. Stolen vehicle. Claims it is hers. Big performance. Wedding dress and everything. Naomi looked at the numbers above the elevator door. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. Thomas Reed stared straight ahead, his hands folded in front of him. Ryan kept talking. Yeah, I know. I will have her in courtroom too. Your dad will make quick work of it. He paused, listening, then frowned. What do you mean he is not answering? The elevator bell chimed. The doors opened onto the fourth floor, where the hallway outside courtroom 2 was unusually crowded for a Saturday morning. Lawyers stood in small clusters. Clerks moved quickly. A county administrator in a dark blue suit turned when he saw Naomi and went pale. At the end of the hall, mounted beside the courtroom doors, was a polished brass nameplate covered with a temporary paper sleeve. Ryan did not notice it. His eyes were on the crowd, enjoying the attention, mistaking their shock for curiosity. Naomi noticed everything. Evelyn stepped forward and whispered to the administrator. Thomas Reed moved to the courtroom doors. Ryan tightened his grip on the paperwork in his hand, lifted his chin, and announced to no one in particular, "I need this processed fast. Judge Whitaker knows me." The hallway went quiet in a way no hallway should. A young assistant district attorney looked down at her files. An older attorney took off his glasses. Evelyn Carter finally turned to Ryan, and her voice was soft enough to be polite, but sharp enough to cut through every illusion he had carried into that building. "Officer Whitaker, Judge Harold Whitaker no longer presides in this courtroom." Ryan blinked. "What did you say?" Before Evelyn could answer, Thomas Reed pulled the paper sleeve away from the brass plate beside the door. The new name caught the light. Honorable Naomi E. Brooks. For the first time that morning, Ryan stopped smiling. Ryan stared at the brass nameplate as if the letters were rearranging themselves just to embarrass him. Honorable Naomi E. Brooks. The hallway held its breath around him. For a few seconds, the only sound was the distant hum of the courthouse lights and the soft rustle of Naomi's dress as she shifted her weight with quiet control. He looked from the nameplate to Naomi, then back again, searching for some loophole, some misunderstanding, some way to make the truth smaller than his pride. "That is not possible," he said. Evelyn Carter did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The administrative order took effect this morning. Ryan's face tightened. "Judge Whitaker told me he was still handling weekend emergency hearings." The county administrator stepped forward, his expression careful but firm. Judge Harold Whitaker was relieved of all courtroom duties pending review. Judge Brooks was sworn in at 7:15 this morning. The words moved through the hallway like a quiet thunderclap. Naomi stood in her wedding dress with cuffs still on her wrists, but suddenly, every person there understood the shape of the morning. She had not been brought into the courthouse as an accused woman. She had been brought into her own courtroom by a man who thought the badge on his chest could outweigh the truth in front of his eyes. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. His phone was still in his hand. On the screen, his wife's name glowed above a call that had gone silent. From the small speaker came a faint voice asking what was happening, but Ryan could not answer. Naomi finally turned toward him fully. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, and that made it worse for him. "Officer Whitaker, remove these cuffs." He blinked. Pride returned just enough to make him hesitate. "I need confirmation." Thomas Reed stepped closer, his tone flat. "You just received it." The hallway watched. This was the moment power often tried to save face, the moment when apology would have been easier than arrogance, but Ryan had built too much of himself on never stepping back. "She was detained under suspicion," he said, louder now, trying to recover authority by increasing volume. "I followed procedure." Naomi looked at the registration papers still folded in his hand. "You had the registration. You had my license. You had my insurance. You had a matching vehicle identification number. You had a body camera recording every word. What you did not have was probable cause." The phrase landed with legal precision. Not anger. Not accusation. Precision. Ryan looked around and realized the people in the hallway were no longer a crowd. They were witnesses. Evelyn Carter set the folder on a nearby table and opened it. Inside was a printed copy of Naomi's appointment order, signed and sealed. Beside it was the preliminary notice concerning Judge Harold Whitaker's removal from active duty. Ryan saw his father-in-law's name and felt something inside him dip. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. Because Judge Whitaker had always been the wall at his back. A complaint disappeared here. A questionable stop softened there. A hearing moved quietly. A report corrected in language that protected the uniform more than the person harmed by it. Ryan had never called it corruption. He had called it family. Naomi's eyes moved to the open folder, then back to Ryan. "There is something you should understand about this courtroom," she said. "It does not belong to your father-in-law. It does not belong to you. It does not belong to anyone who thinks justice is a favor passed between relatives." The hallway remained silent. Even the attorneys seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. Ryan's hands moved to the cuff key on his belt. For the first time all morning, they were not steady. He unlocked the cuffs one side at a time. The metal loosened from Naomi's wrists, and the sound was softer than when it had closed, but somehow heavier. Naomi brought her hands forward. Faint marks circled her skin. She did not rub them. She did not hide them. She let the hallway see what assumption had done. Then she picked up her bouquet from the small evidence tray where someone had placed it, straightened one bent rose with her fingertips, and looked toward the courtroom doors. "Courtroom 2 will open now," she said. Ryan swallowed. "Your Honor, I did not know." Naomi paused at the title, not because she needed to hear it, but because he needed to say it. She looked at him with a sadness sharper than fury. "That was never the problem, Officer Whitaker. The problem is who you thought I was when you did not know." The courtroom doors opened, and the room rose before Naomi even reached the bench. That was the first moment Ryan truly understood that the building had changed sides. Not against him because of personal hatred, not because anyone had shouted louder, but because truth had finally arrived with a name, a seal, and a witness list longer than his excuses. Naomi walked down the center aisle in her wedding dress, the faint marks still visible on her wrists, her bouquet resting in one hand like a quiet reminder that she had been pulled away from a sacred mourning for something that should never have happened. Every eye followed her. Attorneys stood frozen beside their tables. A court reporter adjusted her machine with trembling fingers. Evelyn Carter moved to the clerk's station and placed the appointment order into the official record. Thomas Reed stood near the doors, shoulders squared, watching Ryan with the kind of calm that warned him not to make another mistake. Naomi stepped behind the bench and looked at the chair that had belonged to Judge Harold Whitaker for nearly 19 years. For almost 2 decades, people had stood in that same room hoping for fairness, while private relationships moved beneath the surface like roots cracking a foundation. Today, the chair felt heavier than wood and leather. It felt like history waiting to be corrected. Naomi set her bouquet beside the gavel, then remained standing. "Please be seated," she said. The room obeyed. Ryan stayed near the aisle, unsure whether he was an officer, a defendant, a witness, or a man watching his life become evidence. His face had lost its color. He tried to look composed, but his eyes kept moving to the nameplate, then to Naomi, then to the closed courtroom doors as if he expected Harold Whitaker to walk through them and put the world back the way it had been. Naomi saw that hope in him. It almost made her pity him. Almost. "For the record," she said, her voice steady, "this court will address an unlawful detention that occurred outside St. Matthew's Chapel less than 30 minutes ago." Ryan shifted. "Your Honor, I acted on a report." Naomi looked to Evelyn. "Madam Clerk, has dispatch confirmed the origin of that report?" Evelyn glanced down at a printed note that had been handed to her moments before. "Yes, Your Honor. The initial call was anonymous. Dispatch has since confirmed there was no active stolen vehicle report matching Judge Brooks's vehicle identification number, license plate, or registered owner." A murmur passed through the room and died quickly. Naomi turned back to Ryan. "So before you stopped me, there was no verified report." Ryan swallowed. "I was acting on suspicion." Suspicion based on what? Silence. It was a simple question, the kind judges ask every day, the kind officers answer every day when the facts are clean. But there, under the lights, with his own camera recording and the registration papers still creased in his hand, Ryan found no clean answer waiting for him. "The vehicle appeared unusual for the area," he said finally. Naomi's expression did not change. St. Matthew's Chapel sits on one of the busiest wedding routes in the city. Luxury vehicles are common there on weekends. He looked down. The circumstances seemed unusual. A bride arriving at a church seemed unusual. Another silence. This one was worse. It widened around him until even he could hear the truth inside it. Naomi leaned back slightly, not relaxing, simply letting the weight of the moment do what anger could not. "Officer Whitaker, you asked for my keys. You reviewed my documents. You ignored the matching registration. You dismissed my explanation. You placed me in restraints in front of my family, my guests, and members of the public. You then transported me to a courthouse where you believed your father-in-law would protect your decision." Ryan's head lifted sharply. "I never said that." Evelyn's voice came from the clerk's station. "The hallway security system recorded your phone call, Your Honor." Naomi did not look away from Ryan. "And your body camera recorded the rest." The room went completely still. Ryan's mouth tightened, but no words came. For the first time that morning, the badge on his chest looked smaller than the silence around him. Naomi picked up the gavel, not to strike it, but to feel the responsibility of it in her hand. "This court is ordering the immediate preservation of Officer Whitaker's body camera footage, vehicle camera footage, dispatch audio, hallway security recording, and all related communications from this morning." The matter will be referred to Internal Affairs and the District Attorney's Civil Rights Division for review. Ryan's shoulders dropped by a fraction. The fall was small, but everyone saw it. Naomi placed the gavel down gently. "You thought this courtroom was where my story would end," she said. "But this is where the record begins." The order to preserve the recordings changed the room faster than any raised voice could have. Until that moment, Ryan had been trying to survive the morning as a misunderstanding, a bad stop, a decision made under pressure. But recordings do not care about pressure. They do not soften tone, repair arrogance, or remove the pause before a cruel assumption. They remember. Naomi watched him realize that, and she did not look away. Evelyn Carter entered each item into the court record with a voice that sounded calm only because she had spent 30 years learning how to keep emotion out of official language. Body camera footage, dash camera footage, dispatch audio, hallway security recording, radio log, phone record, timestamps. Each phrase landed like a stone placed carefully on a scale. Ryan stood beside the aisle with his hands at his sides, no longer reaching for his phone, no longer glancing toward the doors. The courtroom had become too quiet for rescue fantasies. Then the rear doors opened, and Marcus stepped inside. He had not run from the chapel. He had walked the 5 blocks with Denise and half the wedding party behind him, because panic would have given the morning another wound, and he refused to let Ryan take more from them than he already had. Marcus entered in his charcoal suit, tie still perfectly straight, but his face carried the kind of controlled fear that only love can create. His eyes found Naomi behind the bench, then dropped to her wrists. The marks were faint, but he saw them. Of course he saw them. His jaw tightened, and for 1 second the room felt the grief of a groom seeing his bride turned into evidence. Naomi gave him the smallest nod. "I am here. I am standing. I am still myself." Marcus stopped near the front row and placed one hand over his heart, not as a performance, but as a promise that he would not break the silence she needed. Denise sat beside him, tears in her eyes, but her back straight. Behind them, bridesmaids in soft blue dresses filled one row. An uncle from Atlanta removed his hat and held it against his chest. A flower girl too young to understand the law leaned against her mother, whispering why Miss Naomi was sitting up there instead of walking down the aisle. No one answered. Some questions are too honest for the moment that creates them. Naomi turned to the clerk. "Madam Clerk, please note the presence of civilian witnesses from St. Matthew's Chapel." Evelyn nodded. "So noted, Your Honor." Ryan's eyes shifted toward the wedding guests, and embarrassment finally broke through his fear. These were not strangers anymore. These were faces he had stood in front of while deciding Naomi did not belong beside her own car. The woman with the phone from the coffee shop was there too, escorted quietly by a deputy. Her name was Alicia Grant, a nurse on her way to a morning shift, still wearing her navy scrubs. She had recorded the curbside stop from across the street. When Evelyn called her forward, Alicia stood with trembling hands but steady eyes. "Your Honor," she said, "I saw the officer look at the paperwork. I saw him keep going after she told him everything matched. I heard him say she did not belong behind the wheel." The room stiffened. Ryan shook his head. "That is not exactly what I meant." Naomi looked at him. "Meaning does not erase impact." Then Thomas Reed stepped forward with a tablet from the courthouse security office. The dispatch supervisor had sent a preliminary confirmation. The anonymous call had come from a blocked internet number, and the vehicle description had been vague, almost useless. White luxury car near the historic district. No plate number. No owner name. No verified theft report. Nothing that should have become cuffs on a bride's wrists. Naomi listened without interrupting, and the more she listened, the clearer the pattern became. It was not just Ryan's mistake. It was the confidence behind the mistake. The certainty that if he pushed hard enough, the facts would bend afterward. The certainty that someone like Harold Whitaker would make the record look cleaner than the truth. But Harold was not on the bench anymore. His shadow remained. But shadows lose power when the lights come on. Naomi turned to Ryan again. "Officer Whitaker, pending review, you are relieved from courtroom security privileges and referred for administrative suspension through your department chain of command. You will surrender any case-related materials to the court before leaving this room." Ryan looked as if he wanted to argue, but the words had nowhere safe to stand. He placed the registration, the printed citation form, and his incident notes on the table. For the first time, his hands looked empty. Naomi's. Voice softened, not with mercy for him, but with respect for the room. This court will not turn humiliation into spectacle. It will turn facts into accountability. Marcus closed his eyes, and a breath moved through the front row like a prayer finally released. Naomi looked toward the clock above the courtroom doors. The ceremony was already late. Her dress carried a stain near the hem. Her wrists carried marks. Her mourning carried a scar. But her voice did not shake when she spoke again. We will take a brief recess. Justice has work to do, and so do I. The recess did not feel like a pause. It felt like the courthouse inhaling before the next truth surfaced. Naomi stepped into the small chambers behind courtroom 2, the same chambers where Harold Whitaker had signed orders for years beneath framed certificates and photographs of handshakes with men who smiled like power was something inherited. The room had already been cleared of most of his personal things, but a faint outline remained on the wall where his largest portrait had hung. Naomi noticed it immediately. Empty spaces can tell the truth too. Marcus entered a moment later with Denise beside him, and the instant the door closed, the strength Naomi had held in public softened at the edges. Marcus crossed the room slowly, not rushing her, not touching her wrists until she offered her hands. When he saw the faint marks up close, his eyes filled with a pain he refused to turn into anger in front of her. I am so sorry, he said. Naomi shook her head. You did not do this. I know, he whispered, but I should have been there. She looked at him then, and for the first time all morning, her voice carried the weight she had hidden from everyone else. You were exactly where we were supposed to meet. Denise placed Naomi's bouquet on the desk and gently smoothed one crease in the veil. No one said the obvious thing, that the wedding was late, that guests were waiting, that the bride had been forced to choose between ceremony and duty before she had even reached the aisle. Outside chambers, the courthouse kept moving. Evelyn Carter received a sealed email from the County Judicial Review Office. Thomas Reed escorted Ryan to a side conference room, where his supervisor had arrived with 2 internal affairs investigators. Ryan no longer looked like the man who had stood by the Bentley with a smirk. His voice had dropped. His posture had changed. The confidence that once filled every corner around him had drained away, leaving behind a man listening to consequences in plain English. Then Harold Whitaker arrived. He came through the 4th-floor hallway in a dark suit, red-faced, breathing hard from the elevator, with his daughter trailing behind him and asking him to slow down. He did not look retired. He looked offended. For nearly 19 years, that hallway had been around him. Clerks lowered their voices when he passed. Attorneys stood straighter. Officers relaxed, knowing they were entering friendly territory. But that morning, no one moved out of his way fast enough to feed the illusion. Harold stopped near the nameplate outside courtroom 2 and stared at Naomi's name like it was an insult carved into brass. Where is she? He demanded. Evelyn Carter stepped forward. Judge Brooks is in chambers. His eyes sharpened. Do not call her that in front of me. The hallway went quiet again, but this silence was different. It was no longer fear. It was witness. Evelyn, who had served under him for more than 2 decades, lifted her chin. That is her title. Harold looked as if he might argue, but the county administrator appeared with 2 documents in hand. One was the order removing Harold from active duty pending formal review. The other was a notice expanding the review to include cases involving Officer Ryan Whitaker. Harold's face changed as he read. Not dramatically, not like a villain in a movie, more like a man seeing the locked door he used for others closing from the other side. Inside chambers, Naomi heard the raised voices through the wall, but she did not move toward them. She was looking at the desk. On it sat her wedding bouquet, her signed oath, and the preserved copy of Ryan's incident notes. 3 versions of the same day. Love, duty, injustice. She picked up the oath first. The paper was smooth beneath her fingers. Marcus watched her quietly. What do you need? He asked. Naomi took a breath. 5 minutes. When she returned to the courtroom, Harold was already there, standing near the front with the strained dignity of a man who had expected the room to remember him kindly. Ryan sat behind his supervisor, pale and silent. Naomi entered without the bouquet this time. She wore the same wedding dress, the same veil, the same stain at the hem, but something in her presence had shifted. She was no longer a bride interrupted. She was the bench restored. Everyone rose. Even Harold, after one bitter second, stood. Naomi looked across the room at the officer who had doubted her at the former judge who had protected men like him, at the witnesses who had chosen not to look away. Then she sat, and the room sat with her. "This court will make one thing clear," she said. "A badge is not a family privilege. A courtroom is not a private shelter. And justice does not retire simply because powerful men become uncomfortable." Harold looked down. Ryan closed his eyes. Marcus, from the front row, finally let himself breathe. The collapse did not come with shouting. It came with records, signatures, cameras, and a bride who refused to let humiliation have the final word. By the time Naomi finished speaking, the courtroom understood that the morning had become larger than one traffic stop, larger than one ruined schedule, larger than one officer standing small beneath the weight of his own choices. It had become a record of what happens when power forgets that it is borrowed, not owned. Ryan sat in silence while his supervisor collected his badge number, his incident notes, and the temporary access card that had allowed him into restricted court areas for years without anyone questioning why he came and went so freely. Harold Whitaker remained near the front row, his face stiff, his hands folded over the top of his cane, trying to look wounded instead of exposed. But the room had seen too much. Evelyn Carter filed the preservation order. Thomas Reed escorted Alicia Grant to provide her witness statement. The county administrator confirmed that all related cases involving Ryan and reviewed by Harold would be flagged for independent audit. One by one, the invisible strings began to show. Not loudly, not with drama, with procedure, with signatures, with the kind of careful accountability that outlives outrage. Naomi looked across the courtroom and saw Marcus sitting beside her mother, still in his wedding suit, still holding the folded vows he had written for her. The sight nearly broke her composure, not because she felt weak, but because love had been waiting patiently while justice demanded the first dance. She looked down at her own hands, at the faint marks left behind, at the ring she had not yet placed on Marcus's finger, and she understood something she would remember for the rest of her life. Some doors do not open the way we planned. Some aisles are not covered in flowers. Some vows begin before the ceremony, in the moment a person chooses truth over comfort. Naomi lifted the gavel gently and brought the room to order one final time. "This court is in recess pending formal review," she said. "All preserved materials will remain under court protection. No personal relationship, prior position, or private influence will interfere with this process." Then she paused and looked directly at Ryan. He could not meet her eyes for more than a second. "Officer Whitaker, what happened today did not begin when you saw my car. It began when you decided my appearance mattered more than my documents, my words, and my rights." Ryan's face tightened, but he said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the cameras had not already answered. Naomi turned slightly toward Harold. "And Judge Whitaker, the bench is not a family heirloom. It is a public trust." Harold's lips pressed together. For the first time, the title that had once protected him sounded like something he no longer deserved. Naomi stood, and the entire room rose with her. She did not rush. She stepped down from the bench carefully, her dress brushing the floor, the small stain near the hem still visible. Marcus met her at the aisle, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He reached for her hands, then stopped, letting her decide. She placed them in his. His thumb moved softly over the marks on her wrists, and his eyes filled again. "Are you ready?" he asked. Naomi looked toward the courthouse doors, then toward the clock. The ceremony was nearly an hour late. The flowers at the chapel were probably drooping. The guests were probably restless. The perfect morning was gone, but something truer had taken its place. She nodded. "I am ready now." They walked out of the courthouse together, Marcus on one side, Denise on the other, the wedding party following behind them like a quiet procession of witnesses. Outside, the sun had climbed higher over Savannah, bright against the courthouse steps. People who had filmed the beginning now lowered their phones as Naomi passed. No one cheered. Not at first. The silence was too deep for applause. Then Alicia, the nurse in navy scrubs, whispered, "Congratulations, Your Honor." Naomi stopped, turned, and smiled for the first time that morning. "Thank you," she said. Back at St. Matthew's Chapel, the doors opened again. The violinist began to play, softer this time, as if the music understood what had been survived. Naomi walked down the aisle with a faint mark on her dress and a steadiness no stain could touch. When she reached Marcus, he did not ask what had happened. He already knew. Everyone did. She leaned close and whispered, "I am late because justice had to arrive first." And somewhere across town, in a courthouse that no longer belonged to old favors and hidden protection, a brass nameplate caught the noon light. He thought a badge could decide who belonged behind the wheel. By noon, the woman he doubted was behind the bench, reminding everyone that justice does not ask permission to take its seat.